there, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Skits and Giggles. My name is Kody. I live with schizophrenia.
And my name's Kit, and I live with schizoaffective disorder.
And despite listening to us every week and some of the people listening to us being advocates, we recognize that having conversations about mental illness and schizophrenia can be really difficult. So, we wanted to have an episode specifically about how to talk to loved ones, friends, family, coworkers about your diagnosis. This is something that me and Kit are going to share our personal experiences with. We're going to talk about some pros, some cons, and then how to really go about these conversations. I think people hear us talk and assume that we've just been so good about talking about this the entire time and we got it all figured out. And that would be not the case at all, guys. Um, I think I want people to recognize that even advocates who are very open about their illness probably or most likely had a period of time where even they didn't want to discuss it or talk about it or acknowledge it publicly. So, as two people who have severe mental illness diagnoses, we want to talk about, some of the reasons that we think it's important to have these conversations. Kit's also going to give some examples of cons, like things to be worried about and things to look out for. So, I'm going to let you get started. I really am interested. We had different ideas coming into this episode, so I'm kind of interested to hear like a little bit of your pros and cons to start off the conversation, just to get us into this conversation about talking to others regarding our mental illness.
Well, it's important to say that there are pros and cons to waiting to talk about mental illness,
Yes.
and
Yes.
there's pros and cons to not waiting to talk about mental illness. So there's multiple things to think about, and it's not like I'm sitting here advocating for everyone to tell everyone about their mental illness.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely situations where it wouldn't be ideal.
Hmm.
But it's very interesting because I've kind of dealt with situations where I've told people right away, and then there's been situations even in my recent life where I've waited to say something. And both of those situations have their own sets of pros and cons.
Yeah.
So I guess I could start by saying that the difference between waiting and not waiting does come down to personal preference for sure. And
Yeah.
it's different for everyone, and it's going to be different for everyone. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is really important too because I always look at how to tell people and when to tell people in different groups, right? So for me, people that are in my life more than a few days a week, I tell them as soon as possible. Now, that might not be how everyone looks at it because one of the examples I'm about to give is I always disclose to coworkers, people that worked with me about my diagnosis, and I want to also like you just said follow that up with not everyone has to do that. That was my own preference because I recognize that with my symptoms, it's only a matter of time until people who are around me regularly see that I struggle. And I would rather get ahead of it, have those conversations. So for me, that group includes family members, usually just like people I see regularly. There are distant family members that I don't talk to it as openly about. But I also close friends, friends that I see more than a few times a month. I always disclose that. Or if I make a new friend, I often disclose that very quickly. Now, one of the things we talked about in our episode about relationships, which is something I haven't had to deal with because I'm married, is I have never had to tell someone on like a first date or on a second date or whatever about my schizophrenia diagnosis. But to what Kit just said, there are really good times to tell people depending on how often you see them, how much you deal with outward symptoms of your illness that people might have to experience, getting ahead of those conversations. So go into your next bit here. What do you think is the next like pros and cons that you're looking at?
I want to talk about a situation where I chose to wait to tell them about a mental illness. And then I'll talk about the pros and cons of that whole situation because there were pros and cons with it. And so this was someone I met years ago at a convention. It was like a mutual friend or whatever, and I ended up having a crush on this person as well. And so as we got to know each other, I kind of had this whole feeling of I kind of didn't want him to know. Like maybe I just wanted to cosplay as a neurotypical person just a little bit longer. And so as a result of that, like we grew our friendship and everything, and he was able to get to know me. And it was kind of nice for me to just essentially pass for a bit. And that was something that I knew would not last. I knew I needed to say something. And eventually I did bring it up, and he was fine with it. And I shared my content with him, and he thought it was cool. But there were cons potentially down the line that would have caused issues in which I would have had symptoms that were unexplained. So, like, I would be potentially hallucinating or having a mood swing. Like, I'd be manic or I'd be depressive or hypomanic and mildly depressive. And it'd be like there's no explanation there for it. And as a result of that, he wouldn't have been able to like help me with any of those things. And while it later ended up not working out like at all for like multiple reasons, that experience, that experience of me choosing to wait just to see, frankly, what it was like to do that was interesting. And so that was one situation where in recent years where waiting was it wasn't detrimental, it wasn't a bad thing, but it was definitely one of those things that taught me that I should just say it in the beginning and not wait to do it. Because there was another part of me that was like, what if when he finds out he's not going to want to hang out with me anymore and I wasted all this time like getting to know this person, but getting that stuff out in the way in the beginning makes perfect sense. So it's kind of interesting that you do that with so many people in your life almost immediately. I definitely tell people now more so, but I feel like I wait a little bit longer than you do. Like you
Oh
sound
yeah.
like you do it like right off the bat in a lot of cases.
I literally told a coworker the day I met them once. Like
Wow.
here's the thing though, and this is an important factor for people to realize. Part of the reason I do that now is because I would meet people, and people, we live in the 21st century. Sometimes people Google your name when they meet you.
Oh.
And I'm very lucky to have built an amazing online social media presence where I couldn't hide my diagnosis if I wanted to. So that did play a factor in me having that conversation. It also, when I was working and doing that stuff, it's part of my life. It's also kind of my job. So it's like I couldn't avoid the conversation for that long. And I do believe that even just with the mental illness, you can only avoid the conversation for so long if it's someone you're around regularly. But I definitely do. I do have that conversation probably more quickly than I think most people I talk to. And so consider that. Don't take my if you're listening right now. You're like, oh, I have to tell everyone the minute I meet them. That's not what I'm saying at all. You do it to your level of comfortability. But for me, that's just what became the most comfortable, natural thing was like, hey, this is going to be something that will come up. So I want to talk about it now when I'm feeling good or early on so I can answer any questions a person might have.
Oh, answer questions. That's a good point. I like
Yeah.
that. Also, what you said about the Google thing, that's something I realize I have to worry about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you continue to grow, it's going to be something that you literally can't hide from. Like early on in my advocacy, it was like people could Google me and eventually find me. If you type in my name now, even if you misspell it and do a C instead of a K, you will
Ooh.
find me. And almost every headline has the word schizophrenia in it. So it became unavoidable at some point for me.
And I do want to also point out that there's a version of telling people that doesn't involve necessarily telling them like the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that, like, for me, for example, I told my boss, I started off by telling him that I had a mood disorder,
Hmm.
which, I mean, was technically not true because schizoaffective disorder is more than a mood disorder, it has the psychotic symptoms to it. But I chickened out and I told him I had a mood disorder. And it was basically enough that the symptoms that were affecting me the most, because the mood side affects me the most and everything, explaining that part was enough to get, like, the accommodations and the help I needed. And so I think that I'm in a position where I have like basically two halves of a disorder and they affect me differently. And so sometimes I'll tell people like one half and not the other half, just depending on how much they need to be informed, depending on the situation. And that's primarily work situations because work is one of those situations where like in my case, I don't feel like I could just tell everybody that I I had it and I would be okay. I just don't feel like I'm at that point. Of course, they can find this podcast, and if my coworkers listening to this podcast, hello, hi, I'm your coworker. But it's one of those things where like it depends on the environment, and sometimes just telling people how the mental illness affects you is the best way to go about that conversation in the beginning for people.
I love
So,
that. Yeah, I think something that I've never considered, once again because of my circumstances, is I definitely see a world where you could say I live with a mental illness or I live with a disability and leave it at that. Like I do think that that is a reasonable thing to do. Sometimes I probably overshare. If you know me in real life, you know that I'm a bit of a trauma dumper, and so like without even meaning to, I probably do share more than I really need to, and so once again, I think that comes down to comfort level, how much you know a person, how much you trust a person, before you get into a lot of the specifics.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. What is your main motivation in telling people so soon? Like, what's your main driver for that?
I realized that there are a couple things. The first thing is like I just said, I realize that it's only a matter of time until someone who is around me a lot sees that I struggle with this illness. Because of the way that I have breakthrough auditory and visual hallucinations, I'm gonna say this and it's gonna sound like a joke, but I do mean it. Uh, you can only hide schizophrenia so long when you're literally talking to people who aren't there, right?
Mm.
So, like, I know that eventually, if someone's around me, they're gonna see these symptoms. And I choose to get ahead of that because I found in my years of living with this, that conversation is a lot easier beforehand than trying to explain after someone sees me experiencing hallucinations. It's so much easier to get ahead of, and it also allows people, which I just said, it allows people to ask questions, and that makes people more comfortable with me. It allows them to feel like they can help me in situations where I might need help, either reality checking or grounding myself. I also find that as an advocate, I always want to help people be more aware of this diagnosis. So I think part of my motivation is that I am truly a schizophrenia and mental health advocate. And I know that there are still a lot of people in this world who, I mean, you can read my comment section. There are a lot of people in this world who either don't understand what schizophrenia is or how it affects people. And so I have a urge and a need within to help more people understand it. Not just as a person living with it, but as someone who was raised by a loved one living with schizophrenia. I think there's a lot of harm in the general population not understanding it better. So a lot of my motivation does come from my advocacy, I think. But for my personal life, I just really think that the reason I do it is because I want people to be able to feel comfortable around me. And I think that's hard if I start experiencing symptoms and they have no context to what that is or what it looks like.
So, a follow-up question to that. See, you tell people you have schizophrenia pretty early on. Have you ever like scared someone off, or has it ever backfired?
Yes. So to your pros and cons list, I think that is important to acknowledge. I have lost friends. I've had family stop reaching out. I've had coworkers asked to like, I literally had a coworker at an old job asked to go to a different shift so that they didn't have to work with me. So it is a very real thing, and I think that is important to acknowledge, because I don't want it to be like, oh, I tell everyone and it's always perfect and everything's fine. There are a lot of times where I find that because of the lack of education or the lack of awareness around it, people still do get nervous or afraid or want to not be around me. So I do have trouble with that to this day. I have even recently, told someone who decided to stop talking to me, and I have just kind of accepted that as part of being open and honest with my diagnosis. I won't say that that makes it easier, but it does help me to understand that not everyone is gonna accept me. Not everyone's gonna want to be a part of my life, and that's true whether or not you live with a mental illness. Like sometimes people just don't like your vibe. People just don't want to, spend additional time with you. So I try not to take it personal, which is easier said than done most of the time. But yes, there are times where it has affected me negatively. There's also I talk about this in my book about mental health and mental illness in the workplace. But there are times where telling supervisors or HR has also not went well for me because of outdated ideologies or outdated beliefs that people have about this diagnosis. So, yes, that is a very real concern to have, and it's a very valid thing to address and acknowledge.
It's a tough thing to deal with and try to navigate for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any more like pros and cons you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about the pros and cons of not waiting and doing
Yeah.
it immediately, which is kind of building off what I asked you about people potentially getting scared off, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's definitely a con of telling someone immediately. I've had a few people get freaked out and not want to really talk to me as much as well because they see the schizo part. And yeah, I just that's yeah, people are just mean and cruel sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I will say, even when people have been, like, scared off and don't wanna talk to me anymore, I don't regret telling them.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
I wanna double down on that too. Like, what I
yeah.
just said about, like, having lost people in my life because of telling them, I don't ever regret it because I also realize, like, those people probably weren't gonna be understanding or accommodating when I did have symptoms. So, it's better for me in the long term that those people probably aren't in my life. So, I never have regretted that decision.
And it's a weird one to not regret given how drastic and dramatic it can
Yeah.
be. For sure, for sure. I am open about, I do wanna point out that while I'm not necessarily open in my workplace about the schizoaffective diagnosis, except for my boss and maybe a few select other people know about certain symptoms, I am open about having obsessive compulsive disorder, which that one there's, like, some stuff with that one, but it doesn't nearly have the same stigma as schizoaffective, so it's easier to talk about. But I've had people get freaked out by me saying I have obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a very interesting situation to be in. But anyway, back to schizoaffective disorder. I had this situation when I was in college, and I think I've mentioned this in the very beginning of like our podcasting time. But I had a group of friends in college that I met when I was in a mood episode, and they still chose to be friends with me after that. So they knew immediately, like literally right off the bat, they knew that I was experiencing hypomania, I was experiencing depression, I was experiencing all of it at the same time, and I was having mixed symptoms, and I was like crying and laughing and crying again, and they saw that side of me. And so I explained to them immediately, like, hey, I'm bipolar, because back then I thought it was just bipolar. And they were like, okay, cool. And the benefit to that was that these people were able to actually help me and support me because they knew what was going on. They knew about the condition. And I also was able to just get it out of the way right off in the very beginning. And then, in a way, also telling them when I did was kind of a weed out process. And so if I tell someone about my condition and I say, hey, I've got schizoaffective disorder, it means I hear and see things that other people don't. And I have a lot of mood swings and mood symptoms. It can kind of like people who wouldn't really have a place in my life. I figured that out soon. And so these people, they passed the vibe check basically. And there was very much a good benefit to that. And so the pros and cons of that are just the pros are that they're able to help me. I weed out the bad ones, and I get it out of the way just right off the bat. And then the cons would have been I could have scared them off, but in that situation, I didn't. And so I was super grateful that they did not run away and just instead were like, "How can we help you?" And I was like, "What? This is awesome."
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I love that example. And I think it kind of talks to what we were just saying about, uh, you might scare people off, but I like it when you have people surrounding you that understand and are willing to help you, it makes life so much easier. So that is so important. Did you have any other examples or things that you wanted to discuss in like a pro con format?
I mean, there was definitely a situation at a recent anime convention I went to where I was talking to someone that I just met, And I told him, I said, "Hey, I have schizoaffective disorder." And he was like, "Schizophrenia?" And I'm like, "Oh, I mean, kind of, but
Here
not
we go.
like, yeah." I'm like, "Golly, this stuff again." But he just immediately went into like asking me questions about like what I hallucinated and if I could tell the difference between a crowd of voices and my hallucinations. And it was just kind of like a situation where I was like, "Oh, I don't want this guy in my life like at all." I was just experimenting with like telling someone right away to see what would happen, like as opposed to just me like like hearing from like a friend that this friend would probably be okay with it. It was like just right off the bat out in the wild, and it was just like, "Ah, this did not turn out well." And so the cons of that were like I had to deal with this guy running into me at the con and having all these preconceived notions about thinking I had schizophrenia. So yeah, I never like the whole, "Oh, you have schizophrenia," and I'm like, "Ah, schizoaffective, affective."
Yeah. That is, it actually made me think of a con about opening up to people, and
Ooh,
that is,
okay, okay.
it's one that I didn't think of just until just now when you mentioned that scenario. Sometimes, with I think the best intentions, some people ask way too personal
Oh
and
my
way
gosh.
too weird of questions.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
like no joke, some of the questions I get after opening up to some people about my diagnosis, I've had people ask me if I hallucinate during sex. I've had people ask me, no joke, I've had people ask me that
Oh my
in
god.
person, and I'm like, so crazy. And then I've had people ask me like really intense questions about my passive addiction or my passive suicidal ideology, like really intense questions. And the longer I do advocacy and like people get to know me, sometimes people get too comfortable asking questions, and those people I kind of like you just said, where you're like, I don't know if this person should be in my life. I've kind of had to step back from people who get a little too personal, and like I'll even tell them, be like, "Hey, that's not a question I'm comfortable asking," and they'll continue to ask questions that are just way too personal or way too unrelated to my diagnosis, I guess. And so that is a definitely a con that I hadn't thought of until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, the questions with the people that I mean I get more questions of just like our podcast where we talked about the 10 most common questions
Yeah,
we get asked. Uh it's just like sometimes I'll meet people and I'll tell them that I have like the disorder, and then they'll ask those questions just rapid fire, and I'm like, "Golly."
and some of them, like some of the really common questions, are like not that bad, and I don't mind
Yeah, yeah,
answering.
for
But
sure,
like,
for sure.
there are some wild questions that people ask, and like I said, I think it's with best intentions. It's
Mhm.
people who are really trying to better understand the diagnosis. But the audacity of some of the
Yeah.
questions people ask, I'm like, you would never ask a neurotypical person a question that personal. And if you would, that's crazy to me. Because like when I gave the example of like a person asking if I have hallucinations during sex, I'm like, to go up and talk to anyone about their sex life is in my mind wild. And I was like, that is so insane to me to be able to just feel comfortable doing that. It's like, yes, I know that I might be neurotypical passing, or as me and Kit like to say, cosplaying as a neurotypical person. But that doesn't mean that you can just ask me questions like that. So that definitely could be a con of like being too open about your diagnosis with some people.
Yeah, it's like they hear I'm a mental health advocate and I talk about how I do YouTube and
Yeah.
everything, and yeah, they're just like they just think they can ask anything away. And I'm
Yeah.
just like the one that gets me is like, "Did you have a traumatic childhood? Did you have this in your childhood?" And
Oh yeah.
I'm like, "Quit asking about my childhood. Like that's for my therapist to know." And yeah, just like the whole big thing. I'm like, "What on earth?" So, yeah, that's a whole frustrating. Yeah, that's a frustrating con. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I just thought of it when you were telling that last experience. But before we start wrapping up here, I do want to ask you, whether you decide to do it right away or you decide to wait. what are the ways that you approach having that conversation? Because I think that's what a lot of people who are going to hear this episode want to know. Because that's what I struggled with early on was like, I knew that I wanted to disclose it and tell people about it, but I didn't know how to go about it. So what are some ways that you start that conversation, or you might prepare to have that conversation with someone?
So for me personally, what I end up doing is I actually do kind of go down what people tend to already have some knowledge about and then build off of it.
Yeah.
So it
The
depends on the part.
scientist in you, right?
Well, it's like schizoaffective disorder. Like one of the reasons I'm an advocate is because I want to raise more awareness about the fact that it exists, right?
Mhm.
And so getting people to like start off by me saying, "Hey, I'm schizoaffective." Sometimes I don't necessarily start off by saying that word. I say, "Hey, do you know what bipolar disorder is? Do you know what schizophrenia is?" And then I can kind of explain those things, and then I can say that schizoaffective disorder is what I have and it has elements of both of those things, but it's not like having schizophrenia and bipolar together.
Yeah.
Um and so I kind of go from, because I mean, part of my problem as an advocate is that I have to explain my condition to almost everybody.
Yeah.
Like that's
I
definitely
don't
something.
You don't have to tell me. I
Yeah.
I get it. I get it for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, but it's like even more so than like just explaining, like if I had just bipolar, it's like
Yeah,
bipolar thing.
for
Yeah,
sure.
so yeah, explaining it away is like a yeah, a thing that all of us have to do technically.
Yeah, just knowing that I think helps, like, that you expect that. Like, you know, like,
Yes.
"Hey, I'm gonna have to explain what my actual diagnosis is."
Yeah, and I have to do it in a way where it's like, "Oh, I experience psychosis and mood." And then that's like, what's the thing there? And so it I kind of get my feelers out with people. I'm not necessarily a like first date talk about the disorder kind of person, or a first meeting, first hangout talk about the disorder kind of person. Um but it depends on the person and how they're talking. I mean, sometimes people are like I've actually been known to tell people after they tell me that they have a friend who struggles with like depression. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, if they're cool with the friend that struggles with depression, they probably have a big chance of being cool with me having schizoaffective disorder. And so I kind of feel it out person to person, and hope for the best. And sometimes I get disappointed, sometimes I get pleasantly surprised. It just depends. I radically accept all of it, and that's how I live my life. So what
I
are
love that.
so how do you approach the conversation?
I blindly tell everyone. That's a little bit of exaggeration, but not that much actually. So, what I loved hearing about yours is like, it's more how I used to approach talking about my diagnosis. Is I would wait for something that would give me the inclination that this person is maybe understanding or accepting of mental health or mental illness. I do think now in life, I will have the conversation with almost anyone. I've told just like people I've met in passing. I've told. I think it does come up more now that it is my job. Like
Mhm.
I do find myself having that conversation a bit more because of that. But uh, I do know that early on I struggled to know when to talk about it. And what I realized was the best thing for me was if it wasn't someone that I was around every single day, I waited for an opportunity for the relevance of it. So it could be talking about disability, it could be talking about a loved one with an illness, like you just said, like whatever it is. I waited for an in,
Mhm.
and that makes it easy because then I think the way I do it now might be really shocking to people because I have no shame in talking about it, and so I think it might be a little shocking or overwhelming for some people I meet, but I do think there's a huge advantage to being able to wait for an opportunity to bring it up that feels natural. Especially early on in your diagnosis when you yourself are just coming to terms with it and just starting to uh, tell other people about it. And one caveat to this conversation I want to acknowledge is that you don't have to disclose your diagnosis to anyone if you don't
Mhm.
feel comfortable, right?
Yes,
I
yes,
do
yes,
want to
yes.
say that because we've been talking this whole time about like how to talk about it, who we talk to about it. But it is also okay to accept that You live with a severe mental illness. That is a part of your life. It is a diagnosis, and you don't have to be open about it. It is a medical thing. Not everyone is open about every medical thing going on in their lives. There are things I deal with medically that I don't tell people about. So I do want people listening to know that that is also an option.
It's important to point that out because in some situations it could be detrimental, it could be unsafe. There's plenty of situations where not saying anything is the best call. I
Yeah.
mean, again, my coworkers, they don't know I'm schizoaffective, or so I think. And that's a definitely a well thought out decision on my part, just to make sure I'm as safe as I can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And
they might find out. They might find out.
yeah, it's you're getting
There's a
big
big
enough.
chance. There's a big chance I'll find out. Again, hi guys, if you're listening to this podcast.
The more you continue to grow these platforms, the harder it's going to be
Yeah.
to not have that. But like we said, that's that might be something where eventually one of your coworkers will be like, "Hey, I saw this YouTube short that had like a million views of you talking about this. I didn't know that you lived with it." So that might come up, but I
There was a moment where my friend was setting up his parents' TV, and one of my YouTube shorts popped up on the YouTube homepage. Yeah, 10 episodes from now I'm going to come on the podcast and be like, "Guys, work knows."
Yeah, I've definitely had situations like that where there's been times where like I wasn't going to disclose my illness and then it's brought up to me. I had a job that I started and I was it was one of my last jobs I had before I started doing advocacy, and I was just starting to really like I had a couple viral videos, and I was on my last interview. I had done two interviews and I had a video going viral, and the person interviewing me in my third interview was like, "Hey, I just saw this TikTok video of you talking about schizophrenia,
Oh my
and
god.
it had like 5 million views." And
Oh my
so he
god.
brought it up, and he's like, by the way, like this it won't affect anything. I just thought this was interesting, and I disclosed that I did get that job. So like he was chill about it, but
Woot, woot,
but
woot,
yeah,
woot.
that was something that actually happened to me.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
But just to kind of wrap up this conversation, I want people listening to this to acknowledge that like conversations about our diagnosis, about our mental health in itself is a spectrum, and it's going to be different for every single person. The way that you talk to your loved ones or your friends about it might be different than how Kit or I talk to our loved ones about it. But also, I want anyone who's not talking openly about their diagnosis or isn't ready to yet to understand that that is also okay and that is an option. And you should not feel any shame for approaching it that way either. So, I always want to acknowledge that as someone who has spent the last 10 years of my life being very open about it. I recognize that that isn't going to be the case for everyone.
And it's also important to note that you don't have to know everything about your diagnosis in order to tell people about your diagnosis.
Yes.
Like we study this stuff, advocates for years. Kody super experienced when it comes to even talking about it to a bunch of people. And it's like, even though we know a lot about our conditions and we're talking about how to tell people, you don't have to be um so knowledgeable about it in order to just tell someone. Like, you can be just diagnosed with schizophrenia and tell your friend, "Hey, I have schizophrenia," and that's totally okay. You don't have to know all the answers. I mean, I don't know all the answers, but you don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to know the DSM-5 criteria. You don't have to know any of that in order to talk to people about this stuff. And I want to make that extremely, extremely clear.
That is such a good point. Early on in my diagnosis, as Kit said, I've spent years learning about schizophrenia
Yeah.
and being able to talk to hundreds and thousands of people about it. But early on in my diagnosis, that conversation used to just be me saying, "My name's Kody. I live with schizophrenia. And this is what I experience." And that's it. I never talked about what the diagnosis was. I honestly, I didn't know a lot of that back then. And that is okay. That is really, if you want to share that as the fullest extent of what you share, that is more than enough for people to understand. And a lot of people might go on to do their own research to help better understand you. So that is okay. I love that you brought that up. I always forget. Once again, like we're in advocate mode so much, I think we
Yeah.
forget to acknowledge these things. So Yes, super important point. Thank you guys so much for hanging out, listening to this conversation. Uh, we would love to hear from you guys about things that you've done to navigate these conversations, people that you tell early on, friends, family, coworkers, whatever it is. I would love to hear from some of the people in our audience about how you guys start these conversations or have these conversations. Kit, where can people follow us? Where can they reach out?
Oh, they can reach out to us on TikTok and Instagram. We are at Skits and Giggles. That is skits like schizophrenia and all spelled out, and giggles like, well, giggles. And if you guys have any guest ideas, topic suggestions, or just want to let us know what you think, drop a comment below, say all that good stuff, and yeah, we'll be reading your comments and seeing what's up. And if you haven't already, like, rate the show, all that stuff really helps us out, and it's easy and free to do so.
Once again, thank you guys so much and good luck in carrying on some of these conversations in your own life. Kit, any final words for the folks?
Of course, as always, guys, remember the brain is a minefield, and we brought flip flops.